You find yourself all alone in your bedroom on a cold, sleepless night. The tumultuous pouring rain, the fierce roaring wind, and that vexatious tree branch that keeps hitting against your bedroom window are maliciously working together to keep you from getting just a moment of refreshing rest. Seems like the perfect time and place for a scary story. You begin scrolling through your iPhone 4S, looking for anything to appease that twinge of morbid curiosity. And then the words creepypasta.com illuminate from your screen. You don't even know where to start, but that tree branch outside is so distracting, you need to take care of that first. You pull back the curtains, but there isn't any tree branch, just a long, bony finger, accompanied by a pale white face with dark black eyes, staring right back at you. I just made that up. Time to make $1 million with a Spirit Halloween costume. Ah, creepypastas. The internet's take on spooky campfire stories. Ben Drowned, Candle Cove, Jeff the Killer, that weird story where Squidward had lasers for eyes, I don't know. But unlike campfire stories, which remain timeless, creepypasta seem to have a pretty short lifespan, reaching its peak back in the early 2010s, and then sort of just slowly fading away and becoming a shadow of what it once was. Oh, creepypasta. I remember that. But how did this happen? With the seemingly endless possibilities that the internet provides, you would think that a horror-based community like creepypasta would be flourishing, especially for longer than just a few years. But you just don't really hear these stories anymore. Now, there were several factors which contributed to the downfall of creepypasta: the oversaturation of similar stories, bad writing, some violence within the community, and even just the very aging of the internet itself. I would even be bold enough to argue that this last point has not just affected the creepypasta community, but online horror storytelling altogether. And now we can take a look at what has since been left behind. Right now, I am at Bob's Big Boy in Burbank, California. Built in 1949, it is the oldest standing restaurant location and remains a cultural hotspot for the Hollywood scene. Film director David Lynch ate here every day for 7 years. And if you've ever wanted to be a filmmaker, well, now you can thanks to Storyblocks. Now, licensing stock footage is just ridiculous. Even the most basic low-budget clips can cost you as much as $800 just to use in a YouTube video. But not with Storyblocks. With just a monthly subscription, you can get access to every piece of stock footage on their website forever, with no restrictions. Their footage covers all kinds of scenes, ranging from city life, aerial shots of nature, or whatever this is. But not only that, Storyblocks offers images, music, sound effects, and even motion graphic templates to spice up your editing skills. But the best part, in my opinion, is their built-in plugin for Adobe Creative Suite. I can search for whatever I want and just download it through Adobe Premiere, and it pops up in my project right away. I don't have to go online looking for it. I use Storyblocks in pretty much every video I make. It's affordable, professional, and really goes a long way in making your work look the way you want it to. And now is your chance to use it as well. Visit the link on the screen to get access to unlimited downloads of stock media at one set price. So go ahead and become a filmmaker today with Storyblocks. Now first, I want to quickly talk about where the concept of creepypasta came from. I mean, the name alone is strange. Creepypasta, like spaghetti? What? It seems totally nonsensical, but it all starts to make perfect sense when you look back at the origins. The creepypasta started as far back as the 1980s and 1990s, pretty much since the internet started, but under a different name, the chain letter. These were particularly common on Usenet newsgroups, a form of communicating on the internet that was quite popular before the World Wide Web took over. Now, we've talked on this channel before about how the World Wide Web essentially brought things like hyperlinks, images, and eventually video to the internet. So before that, these newsgroups were basically just ugly text on a screen. It pretty much looked like a command line. So people would just talk over text. Send this message to 5 other people, or else you will have bad luck. Obviously, due to the nature of the message and its brilliant social engineering, it is literally designed to spread the word and gain recognition. And the more people who are superstitious enough to share this, the more superstitious people will see it. And this just compounds, and before you know it, there are chain letters everywhere. Now, of course, Usenet is still around, but it really was all the craze back then, and this tradition would just pass on to the World Wide Web over the next decade. And naturally, people started getting more creative with these. Rather than telling people to copy and paste these messages, they just did it on their own, often because the message was often so ridiculous or interesting, it was worth sharing. These were either really funny stories or weird rants, and due to the routine of just copy and pasting these stories all around the web, you could safely call the people doing them copy-pasters, and if you want to say it in a funny way, a copy-pasta, which would eventually be read by most people as a copy-pasta. And at around this time, another trend was starting to pick up as well: the online scary story. Much like chain letters, both superstitious and just interested people would start copy and pasting these horror copy-pastas. But because of this distinction, they would soon be coined creepypastas. Or is it creepypasta? Singular plural. Creepypastai? I'm just gonna say creepypastas. Now, of course, scary stories are as old as time, but because the early internet was so unregulated and most people didn't really understand it, this kind of made online horror stories more believable. Referring back to what I said in my username 666 video, one of the big things that made the early internet so weird was the ambiguity. You couldn't really fact check nearly as much as you can now, and so you could argue that online horror stories back then actually were objectively scarier for that reason. An example of this would be the release of the film The Blair Witch Project, which came out in 1999. This film is often credited for popularizing the found footage genre, and it was a massive success, one of the most successful indie films in history. And this is because of how it was marketed. Instead of your traditional movie advertising, people learned about the Blair Witch Project through fictional missing persons posters that were shared around the internet. The actors in the movie used their real names as the characters they played, leaving behind very little paper trail. So many theatergoers were convinced that the Blair Witch Project was real and that these people really disappeared. The marketing team behind the Blair Witch Project understood this Wild West energy that the internet had in 1999, which is why it worked so well. So yeah, you could say that the Blair Witch Project was kind of the first creepypasta, in the sense that it popularized the idea of online scary stories as a mainstream medium. And with the popularity of free website builders, anyone could just start their own blog and write their own scary story. And that's exactly what they did. In 2001, an Angel Fire user posts a story called Ted the Caver, a story about a man who writes journal entries documenting a series of strange findings and paranormal encounters from his cave explorations, and eventually follows up with a post saying that he will be returning to these caves with his friends and a gun. The website never updated again. The author of Ted the Caver remains unknown to this day, and that's what makes the story work so well. The less you know, the more your imagination runs wild. But would I consider Ted the Caver a creepypasta? Well, I don't know. While these stories are more creepypastas in spirit, they probably aren't what you immediately think when you hear creepypasta. Those selections of stories that grew immense popularity in a very short and specific frame of time, the Jeff the Killers, etc. I think the first creepypasta goes to a story that I know most of you are very familiar with. It all started in 2009 when a user named Eric Knudsen, also known as Victor Surge, submitted 2 images to a Photoshop contest on somethingawful.com. But unlike the rest of the submissions, Eric decided to add a little backstory to the photos. One of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformity cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. Eric obviously won the contest, and then people began adding their own elements to the Slender Man story. It would soon become an urban legend created by an entire community. Slender Man would go insanely viral. People were now copy and pasting these images everywhere. Personal blogs, Tumblr, 9gag, iFunny, and of course, Creepypasta.com, a website created in 2008 by a 23-year-old simply known as Sarah, who would copy and paste all the interesting stories she found. Users were also welcome to submit their own stories to the site, but they had to be submitted for approval. So your scary story had to be good if you wanted it on Creepypasta.com. Because even with that suspension of disbelief we just talked about, people weren't immune to online stories that were terrible. In fact, creepypasta parodies were already popping up as far back as 2008, with a ridiculous short story called Who Was Phone? These stories would be known as troll pastas, and I would argue that this was the first symptom of creepypasta's downfall, before it even took off. And now you have more stories showing up. The Rake, a story about a terrifying creature spotted multiple times throughout the United States in the early 2000s. Or Cove, a story written in the format of a message board where all these adults collectively remember this strange, disturbing TV show they watched back in the 70s when they were kids. A character that wears human skin, an entire episode where there's just screaming. Then it's revealed by one of their elderly parents that their kids were just watching static on TV the entire time. These are genuinely creepy stories. They provide details that are peculiar, but ambiguous enough for the reader to come to their own conclusions and perhaps not think that it's too far-fetched. Show, don't tell. It's the same way we treat ghost stories. The concept of a ghost at face value sounds silly, but we all have that one relative that swears they encountered a ghost at some point in their lives. Creepypastas were now getting the same treatment. Oh yeah, Cove was real. My aunt remembers watching it. Much like the routine of copy and pasting these stories themselves, creepypastas carried on through anecdotal stories which increased their believability. Now, of course, there were many people who knew these stories were fake and just loved the writing and entertainment aspect. But I do believe that benefit of the doubt, which was reinforced by the devil-may-care nature that was more common on the internet at the time, was a driving factor. Because what demographic of people enjoys being scared more than anyone else, is more ambitious than anyone else, and is more gullible than anyone else? You guessed it, children. Much like Slender Man, another story would be written based on a popular, scary image, Jeff the Killer. The origins of the Jeff the Killer image are still unknown. In fact, there is an entire online community dedicated to looking for it. And this would become probably the most popular creepypasta, with Jeff becoming a fan favorite of many tweens and adolescent children, particularly the scene and emo children.
It wasn't a big leap for tween girls to translate those sunken black eyes into guy liner, and the scraggly black hair into like a scene haircut. The pale skin is just pale skin.
So naturally, creepypasta was now a community dominated by kids. And so the bar was lowered for what constituted a good creepypasta story. And if you've read Jeff the Killer... The cop looked at his partner and they both nod. Well, kid, looks like a year in juvie. Oh, okay. Looks like we don't have due process anymore. Randy sees a bottle of vodka on the counter and smashes the glass over Jeff's head. Yeah, why is there vodka at an 8-year-old's birthday party? Is it Donald Draper's birthday? I burned out the eyelids so I could forever see myself. Ooh. Oh, Jeff, hope you have eye drops, man. Honey, get the... Ending of Titanic. Bambi, stop laughing. Honey, get the gun. Aw, Mother of the Year. Hey, I mean, no disrespect to the author, okay? I am terrible at writing fiction. It's why I don't do it. But that didn't stop Jeff the Killer from essentially becoming the poster child of creepypasta. And then something amazing would happen in 2010. The Creepypasta Wiki was born. What's so great about a wiki? Well, anyone can post anything they want, whenever they want. Unlike the original Creepypasta website, which had a barrier to entry for bad writers, the Creepypasta Wiki had little to no regulation. And because the branding of the website was so similar, people often conflated the two websites and thought they were the same thing. During this time, creepypasta narration YouTube channels were blowing up, getting many of their stories from the Creepypasta Wiki. It was like the .com bubble, but with a lot of bad grammar and hyper-realistic guys. Imagine yourself as a kid in 2011. Oh wow, I can write the next Jeff the Killer. Then you have an incredible oversaturation of just absolutely awful creepypasta stories. And I'm totally not talking about me here. This got so bad that a new website was created for all the rejected creepypasta.com entries, called crappypasta.com. And Lord have mercy, it was amazing. And then the Trollpasta Wiki would show up shortly after. And so you just have this ever-growing community of coming-of-age teenagers who think they're the next Rod Serling. Again, totally not me. And occasionally you will find that diamond in the goat's ass like Candle Cove, but it really was just an extension of angsty horror fanfiction. And then Hollywood got involved. Yes, the normies were infiltrating. You have a Slender Man movie, a quite successful creepypasta TV show, merchandise, etc. And so the community kind of lost its charm. What really added to the creepiness factor of creepypasta was that it was a bit underground. Unless you were terminally online, chances are you didn't really know what creepypasta was, or at least were only vaguely familiar with it. That small community loneliness aspect enhanced the creepiness of the stories. There's that saying where, much like how a star dies the moment a supernova occurs, a funny internet meme dies the moment it appears on The Ellen Show. Creepypasta died the moment a Jeff the Killer Halloween costume came out. In other words, it got commercialized. It was no longer cool to enjoy creepypastas. It was no longer a subculture. It was now part of mainstream mass media. And then something quite terrible would happen in 2014. Two teenage girls from Wisconsin would lure their friend into the forest and try to kill her for what they believed was part of a ritual to summon Slender Man. Now that's as specific as I'm going to be because I don't want to bring back hurt to the people involved, but the entire story is incredibly tragic and would basically be the straw that broke the camel's back in muddying the creepypasta name. And as time went on, the internet got stronger, fact-checking got much easier, and all those children just grew up. And so the creepypasta community would die out and become only marginally as popular as it once was. But there are still children around who like to be spooked and are gullible. So where are they going? Well, much like a ghost, the community of creepypasta may have died, but its spirit lives on in the form of other horror communities, analog horror, SPCs, the backrooms, things like that. And who knows, those communities could very well retransform into something else entirely later down the line. The art of horror storytelling is cyclical. Campfire stories eventually turned into books. Books eventually turned into online horror stories, which became creepypastas, which became something else. It goes through an evolution. Showing that desire to be scared is passed on from generation to generation, even if that's expressed in an entirely different way, serving as a reminder that not all stories end, they just disappear. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and click the notification bell so that you never miss a future video.